What if everything you believed about getting old was wrong? Helen sat alone in her dimly lit living room, the soft hum of the TV filling the silence around her. At 67, she felt like a ghost in her own home, fading, forgotten, a relic of days that no longer mattered. The worn floral couch beneath her seemed to sag under the weight of years, mirroring the heaviness pressing on her chest. She had lived a full life, teaching generations of children, raising a son, surviving the loss of her husband, but lately, she wondered if all that had vanished into thin air. She reached for the remote and flipped channels with numb fingers until a familiar face appeared on the screen, Elon Musk, the enigmatic billionaire who was rewriting the future with rockets, electric cars, and dreams that stretched beyond the stars. When something is important enough, you do it even if the odds are not in your favor, he said, his voice calm but resolute. Helen's breath caught. Is it too late for me? She whispered to the empty room. Is it too late to matter? The words felt like a question and a challenge all at once. She had been feeling invisible for so long, her son barely returned calls, her friends had drifted away, and her body no longer obeyed her the way it once did. The relentless march of time had dimmed her spirit, but this glimpse of Musk's fearlessness sparked a flicker deep inside. She leaned forward, her eyes narrowing, as if trying to pull those words from the screen and make them her own. What if the rules she lived by, the ones that said her best days were behind her, were wrong? What if this was not the end but the beginning of something else entirely? She didn't know. But for the first time in months, the question refused to leave her mind. On a whim, Helen grabbed her old smartphone, something she rarely used beyond calls and texts, and typed into a search bar, Elon Musk quotes about fear and failure. A dozen phrases popped up, but one caught her attention. Persistence is very important. You should not give up unless you are forced to give up. She repeated the sentence aloud, tasting the words as if they were medicine. Persistence. Could she still do that? Could she find the strength to push through the invisible barriers that age and doubt had built around her? Outside, the wind rustled dry leaves across the cracked sidewalk. The house felt colder than usual, but Helen didn't move to grab a blanket. Instead, she sat up straighter, as though her body was beginning to align with the stirrings of her mind. The phone buzzed, a text from her son. Can't talk now. Busy. The sting was familiar, but this time it didn't close off her heart. She nodded to herself, a quiet vow forming, something had to change. The night deepened, and Helen felt a restless energy she hadn't known in years. She opened a blank note on her phone and started typing. Not a message to anyone else, just words spilling from a place she had almost forgotten existed. What if I'm not done yet, she wrote. What if I have something left to give? She didn't know where this would lead, but the simple act of writing made her feel alive again. The clock ticked past midnight, and the house settled into silence. Outside, a star blinked faintly in the sky, a small point of light that seemed impossibly far away, yet so persistent it refused to disappear. Like Elon Musk aiming rockets at Mars, or a woman fighting to rewrite her own story long after the world told her to stop dreaming. Helen put down her phone and closed her eyes, imagining the life she might still build from this spark. The moment it all changed was not some grand event, but a quiet choice, a refusal to fade without a fight. If you're watching this, wherever you are, maybe you're feeling that too. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Because sometimes, the tiniest spark can light the darkest night. Helen's life before that restless night had settled into a slow, predictable rhythm, the kind that felt safe but hollow. She had spent over 4 decades in the same small town, teaching at the elementary school where generations of local children passed through her classroom. She remembered the first day she stood before a sea of curious faces, full of energy and hope, believing she could shape the future. Back then, Helen was vibrant, confident, and full of dreams, not just for her students but for herself. She wanted to write, to create stories that would capture the imagination the way books had done for her as a child. But life had a way of stealing dreams quietly. After marrying James, her husband of 40 years, the writing was pushed aside. Between raising their son, Mark, and juggling teaching, Helen's days were swallowed up by duties and exhaustion. Writing felt selfish, a luxury she couldn't afford. As Mark grew, their relationship became complicated. The boy who once eagerly told her about his day gradually pulled away, absorbed by his own world. Years of missed dinners, silent phone calls, and unspoken disappointment stretched like invisible walls between them. Now, their conversations were brief and often strained, leaving Helen feeling more alone than ever. Her friendship with Diane, her closest confidant, had faded too. The women had drifted apart over the years, caught in their own struggles. Helen's world shrank, replaced by quiet evenings watching the news, knitting, and feeling the ache of what might have been. The house she shared with James after he passed away 2 years ago felt vast and empty, the silence a constant reminder of loss. She often found herself staring at an old photo on the mantel, a picture of her younger self, standing proudly at her first teaching award ceremony. In it, Helen's eyes sparkled with promise and determination, the kind of light she couldn't find in her current reflection. That image haunted her, not just because of what was lost but because it reminded her of who she once was and still wanted to be. Sometimes she traced the edges of the frame with trembling fingers, wishing she could turn back time, rewrite the years she spent settling for less. Her body told its own story of decline, aching knees, dwindling energy, and the creeping fear that this was all she had left. Doctors had warned her to slow down, to avoid stress, to accept the limitations of age. But Helen resented the idea of surrendering, even if she couldn't find the strength to fight back. The weight of regrets pressed on her, unwritten stories, estranged relationships, forgotten passions. She wondered if her life was nothing more than a faded echo, a whisper lost in the noise of a younger, faster world. At the same time, she carried a quiet hope, buried beneath layers of doubt. It was a feeling she rarely admitted, even to herself, the stubborn belief that somewhere inside, she was still capable of something meaningful. This hope was fragile, like a candle flickering in a draught, but it had not gone out. The memory that haunted Helen most was a summer afternoon from decades ago. She was sitting in the sun-dappled backyard, notebook in hand, trying to write her first story. The words felt clumsy, but her heart was full of possibility. James had been nearby, fixing the fence, and had smiled at her, encouraging her dreams. That moment represented the self she lost, the version of Helen who believed the world could be shaped by ideas and courage. Now, she barely recognized that woman, trapped under years of should have and could have. Yet the memory lingered like a secret invitation, a reminder that the spark had once been there and could still be rekindled. She often thought about Elon Musk, a man who seemed to defy the rules of reality itself. Musk's relentless drive to innovate, to challenge the impossible, felt like a distant echo of the youthful energy Helen once had. Watching his interviews, reading about his failures and breakthroughs, she found herself drawn to the same restless questioning she hadn't felt in years. How did he keep pushing forward when so many told him to quit? What was his secret? In her quieter moments, Helen realized it wasn't just genius or money that fueled Musk's journey, it was his refusal to accept limitations. He rejected the idea that failure was the end and that fear should dictate choices. For Helen, that realization was unsettling but also strangely freeing. Maybe it wasn't about becoming someone else or living a different life. Maybe it was about reclaiming the parts of herself she thought were lost forever. The hardest part was facing the voices inside her head, the ones that whispered, "You're too old, it's too late, no one cares anymore." Those voices had been louder than her hope for so long. But the words of a man she'd never met began to chip away at the walls they built. One evening, after another day spent going through the motions, Helen found herself scrolling through her old journals. The pages were yellowed and filled with half-formed ideas, poetry, and scribbles. She smiled sadly at the evidence of her creativity waiting patiently beneath the dust of years. The realization hit her, those words still existed because she had created them. That meant she still had something to say. With trembling hands, Helen opened a new document on her laptop. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, hesitant but determined. The cursor blinked at her, a silent challenge. What if she tried again? What if she took the first small step toward writing, not for the world but for herself? It felt vulnerable, almost foolish. But beneath the fear was a flicker of excitement, a reminder that she was still alive, still capable of change. The road ahead was uncertain and scary. Her son might never understand. Her friends might not believe in her. Her body might betray her again. But the possibility of reclaiming her story, even in the smallest way, felt worth the risk. Helen closed her journals and sat quietly in the dim glow of the lamp. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel invisible. She felt like a woman on the brink of something new, a journey sparked by a man who dreamed beyond the stars, and a quiet rule he lived by: never give up. That rule was about more than business or technology. It was about life. And Helen was ready to start living again. Helen woke that morning with a knot of doubt tightening her chest. The night's small flicker of hope felt fragile, like a candle threatened by a sudden gust. She wondered again, is it too late? The question echoed in her mind, louder than any reassurance. The years had taught her to be cautious, to accept that some dreams belonged only to the young. But somewhere beneath the fear was a stubborn spark, refusing to be extinguished. Her son, Mark, had always been practical, the kind of man who believed success was measured in steady jobs and quiet lives. When she tentatively mentioned her idea of writing again during their last phone call, his response was a curt, "Mom, maybe you should slow down. Focus on enjoying your retirement." Those words stung sharper than she expected. It wasn't just the dismissal, it was the unspoken message that she should stop trying, stop reaching, stop hoping. Even her doctor echoed the same refrain. "Helen, at your age, stress isn't good for you. Take it easy. You don't need to push yourself." Helen understood the warnings. Her body was not what it had been. The arthritis in her hands flared up on cold days. Her energy waned by afternoon. But giving up felt like surrender, and surrender wasn't in her vocabulary. She wrestled with herself, caught in an invisible war between fear and desire. The world outside seemed to confirm her doubts. News stories about older adults being forgotten, statistics about declining health and shrinking opportunities. The loneliness that had crept into her life was suffocating. But then she found herself reaching for her phone, seeking something different, something that could pull her out of the spiral. One afternoon, while scrolling through her social media feed, a shared video caught her attention: Elon Musk speaking at a technology conference, his voice passionate as he declared, "When something is important enough, you do it even if the odds are not in your favor." Helen watched the clip again and again, the words resonating deep inside her. Musk's life was a constant series of risks and failures, yet he refused to be defined by setbacks. It was as if he was daring her, challenging her to rethink everything she had accepted about age and limitation. But belief alone wasn't enough. Helen felt the pressure mounting. Could she face the skepticism of those around her? What if her son was right? What if trying only led to disappointment? That evening, she sat at her kitchen table, the dim light casting long shadows on the walls. Her fingers trembled as she opened her laptop. The blank screen stared back, a silent judge. "What's the point?" she whispered. "Who will read this? Who cares?" The self-doubt was overwhelming, threatening to crush the fragile hope. She thought about giving up, closing the laptop and retreating into the familiar safety of her routine. But then, another quote flashed in her mind, one she'd read that morning: "Persistence is very important. You should not give up unless you are forced to give up." It was Musk's voice again, steady and unyielding. Helen took a deep breath, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. She started with just a few words, simple thoughts about her day, her fears, and her dreams. The words didn't come easily, but they came. Slowly, a new rhythm formed. Writing became her secret rebellion, a small act of defiance against the narrative that told her she was too old to change. Yet, even as she wrote, the battle within continued. Some days, the doubts returned stronger than ever, clouding her mind with questions. Was she chasing a fantasy? Would anyone ever care? Was the pain and effort worth it? Sometimes the loneliness felt unbearable, the silence of her empty house a harsh reminder of how far she drifted from connection. Her son's distant voice on the phone, her doctor's cautious advice, the community's indifference, they all weighed heavily. But amidst the struggle, there were glimmers of hope. An unexpected comment on her small blog, a nod of encouragement from an old friend, the quiet satisfaction of finishing a paragraph, all these moments stitched together a fragile tapestry of possibility. Helen realized the fight wasn't just about writing or proving others wrong. It was about reclaiming her sense of purpose, about telling herself that her story still mattered. She began to understand that the inner war was not against age or time, but against the fears that threatened to define her. Every day was a choice, to give in or to push forward. As the weeks passed, Helen found new strength in the routine she was building. Writing became a lifeline, a way to anchor herself amid uncertainty. She started listening to podcasts about resilience and creativity, often returning to interviews where Musk spoke about embracing failure and pushing beyond comfort zones. His mindset, radical and fearless, became a compass in her darkest moments. One chilly afternoon, Helen decided to share a small piece of her writing online. Her heart pounded as she hit post, exposing a vulnerable part of herself to a world that might not care. To her surprise, a few kind responses trickled in, words of encouragement from strangers who resonated with her story. It was a tiny victory, but it meant everything. Still, the war raged on. There were days when she questioned her worth, when the fear of rejection almost silenced her. But every time, she remembered Musk's persistence, his refusal to quit despite obstacles that seemed insurmountable. Helen realized she was not alone in this struggle. She was part of a quiet revolution, a growing movement of people refusing to be defined by age or circumstance. The inner war was not a sign of weakness but a battlefield where courage was forged. Helen's journey was no longer just about her own survival, it was about breaking free from the limits imposed by society, about proving that life could be rewritten at any stage. The stakes were high, but so was the reward, the chance to live fully, to create meaning, to be seen and heard once more. As she closed her laptop late one night, Helen felt a sense of calm she hadn't known in years. The battle wasn't over, but she was ready to fight. The inner war had transformed from a source of despair into a crucible of hope. Elon Musk's voice echoed in her mind, a reminder that even in the face of doubt, the greatest victories begin with a single step. Helen was determined to take that step every day, no matter how small. Because deep down, she knew the truth, the only way to lose was to stop trying. Helen woke that morning with a restless energy she hadn't felt in years. The doubts and fears from the previous week still lingered, but beneath them was a new determination, a flicker that had turned into a flame. She remembered Elon Musk's words about persistence, about doing what mattered even when the odds seemed impossible. She realized she didn't need to make a grand, sweeping change all at once. Instead, she just needed one small step, one bold move that could spark a new beginning. The idea came suddenly, as she sat drinking her morning coffee by the window. Helen's gaze drifted to the dusty garage that James had used for his woodworking projects, now a silent, cluttered space filled with forgotten tools and boxes. For years, she had avoided that room, overwhelmed by the memories and the mess. But today, something shifted. What if she reclaimed that space? What if she built something? Not just with wood, but with purpose. Inspired by Musk's relentless building of rockets and electric cars in garages, Helen decided to start small. She pulled on an old sweater, grabbed a pair of gloves, and stepped into the garage. The smell of sawdust and oil was thick, stirring a forgotten part of her soul. She began cleaning, sweeping away years of neglect, creating a space where she could think and create. As she worked, memories floated back, James teaching her to use a hammer, the joy of making something with her own hands, the confidence of crafting solutions. For a moment, Helen felt the weight of time lift, replaced by a childlike curiosity. That afternoon, she rummaged through her old boxes and found scraps of wood, nails, and even a small hand saw. It was rudimentary, but it was a beginning. She sketched a simple design in a notebook, an idea for a birdhouse, something manageable but meaningful. Building that birdhouse was harder than she expected. Her hands trembled, and the arthritis made gripping tools painful. But Helen pushed through, reminding herself that persistence was the rule she was adopting. Each cut and nail was a small victory, a reclaiming of agency and confidence. As the sun set, she held up the roughly assembled birdhouse, imperfections and all. It wasn't perfect, but it was hers. That night, Helen felt a quiet joy she hadn't known in a long time. The act of creating, of building something tangible, ignited a spark deeper than words. It was a reminder that purpose could be found in small actions, in the courage to start. The next morning, Helen took the birdhouse outside and hung it on an old tree in her backyard. She watched as a curious robin landed nearby, inspecting the new home. It felt like a sign. Word about her project spread slowly. A neighbor stopped by to admire the birdhouse, encouraging her to keep building. Encouraged, Helen decided to share her progress on the blog she had started weeks earlier. She posted photos of the birdhouse, along with reflections on how small changes could lead to bigger transformations. The response surprised her. Messages poured in from people of all ages, many over 60, who were inspired to try something new despite feeling stuck. Helen realized she wasn't alone in this desire to reclaim life and purpose. Elon Musk had often talked about the power of iteration, making small improvements, learning from mistakes, and moving forward relentlessly. Helen adopted that mindset. She didn't expect to build rockets or revolutionize industries, but she could build a life that mattered to her. Over the following weeks, the garage became her sanctuary. She worked on new projects, a wooden bench, a set of picture frames, even a small bookshelf. Each creation was imperfect but imbued with meaning. The physical act of building reconnected her to a sense of strength and possibility she hadn't felt in decades. Her blog grew as well. Helen shared stories of her struggles, her small victories, and the lessons she learned. Readers responded with encouragement, sharing their own stories of late-life reinvention. The community that formed around her became a lifeline, a reminder that change was possible at any age. Helen's relationship with her son began to shift too. Mark noticed the change in her voice during their calls, the renewed energy and hope. He started asking questions about her projects and even suggested video calls so he could see her work. It wasn't perfect, and old wounds remained, but for the first time in years, connection felt possible. Helen understood that transformation was not a straight path. There would be setbacks, doubts, and lonely moments. But the choice to act, to build, to create, to persist, was the turning point. The one thing she changed was her willingness to start, imperfect and unsure. Elon Musk's example had been a catalyst, a reminder that fearlessness wasn't about never feeling fear but about moving forward despite it. Helen's journey was her own, grounded in simple acts that rekindled her spirit and rebuilt her confidence. That birdhouse in the backyard was more than wood and nails, it was a symbol of resilience, hope, and the power of one choice to change everything. The day Helen's story began to spread was unexpected and surreal. She had posted a simple blog entry, sharing photos of her modest woodworking projects, including the birdhouse and a rough wooden bench she'd crafted in her garage. The post was filled with honest reflections about feeling forgotten, about the quiet struggle to find purpose again after 60, about how Elon Musk's relentless drive had inspired her to just start. She never imagined the response would be anything more than a few polite comments from friends and neighbors. But within hours, something shifted. Messages started pouring in from strangers all across the country, older adults who felt stuck and invisible, who saw themselves in her words and were moved to reach out. People shared their own stories of loss, regret, and quiet hope. One woman wrote, "I'm 72 and just signed up for pottery classes because of your post." A man from Ohio said, "Your courage gave me the push to finally write the novel I've been putting off for decades." Helen was overwhelmed. For so long, she had believed that time had run out, that her story no longer mattered. Now, she was realizing that her voice had power, maybe not to change the world overnight, but to spark something deeply human, connection and inspiration. As the notifications kept coming, Helen felt a mixture of pride and vulnerability. The spotlight was unfamiliar and uncomfortable. She worried about judgment and criticism, but she also felt a fierce determination to keep sharing, to keep living authentically. That evening, she sat in her quiet kitchen, tears streaming down her face as she read one message after another. A former student she hadn't seen in years wrote, "You always believed in us. Now it's our turn to believe in you." The raw emotion was overwhelming. For the first time in a long time, Helen felt truly seen. Then came the message that surprised her the most, a message from Mark. Her son, who had often seemed distant and skeptical, wrote, "Mom, I read your blog. I'm proud of you." The words were simple, but they carried the weight of years of unspoken pain and longing. Helen's heart ached with relief and hope. Their conversations grew deeper after that. Mark started calling more often, asking about her projects, her writing, even suggesting they collaborate on a video blog. It was a fragile new connection, but a connection nonetheless. Helen realized that breaking through wasn't just about achieving an external goal, it was about healing old wounds and rebuilding relationships. The attention her story received brought new opportunities as well. A local community center invited her to speak about her journey, and a small publishing house reached out, interested in her writing. Helen was scared but excited. She wasn't sure where this path would lead, but for the first time, the future felt open, full of possibility rather than fear. Yet, with every triumph came moments of vulnerability. The emotional weight of reopening old wounds was heavy. She sometimes felt exhausted by the spotlight and the expectations it brought. But she reminded herself of Musk's words, "Failure is an option here. If things are not failing, you are not innovating enough." Helen understood that breakthrough wasn't about perfection or instant success. It was about courage, persistence, and embracing the messy process of growth. One afternoon, as Helen prepared for her first public talk, she stood in front of the mirror and saw the reflection of a woman transformed, not just by external changes but by the inner fire she had nurtured. Her hands bore the marks of work and age, but they were steady and strong. Her eyes held a spark that had once been dimmed but now burned bright. The moment she stepped onto the stage, Helen felt the familiar nerves, but she also felt ready. She spoke honestly about loneliness, fear, and the courage it took to start again after 60. She shared the story of the birdhouse, the blog, and the messages that had reminded her she was not alone. The audience listened, many with tears in their eyes, many nodding as if hearing their own stories reflected back. Helen realized then that breaking through was about more than her own transformation, it was about creating space for others to believe in themselves too. After the talk, dozens of people approached her, thanking her for speaking out, sharing their own struggles and hopes. Helen felt a deep sense of purpose she hadn't known in decades. She wasn't just telling her story, she was helping to rewrite what it meant to age, to change, to grow. Late that night, back in her quiet home, Helen reflected on how far she had come. The journey from despair to hope had been grueling and uncertain. There had been moments she wanted to give up, to retreat into the safety of what was known. But she hadn't. She had chosen to break through the invisible barriers that had held her back. She thought again of Elon Musk, the man who dared to dream impossible dreams and fail spectacularly on the way to success. His example had been a catalyst, but the true change had come from within, Helen's willingness to face fear, embrace vulnerability, and take that one bold step forward. She realized that her story was no longer just her own, it was part of a larger movement of people refusing to be defined by age, fear, or limitation. Breaking through was messy, emotional, and sometimes painful. But it was also beautiful, powerful, and life-changing. Helen whispered to herself, "I was never too old. I was just waiting for permission to matter again." And now, she had given herself that permission. Helen sat on the worn wooden bench she had built herself, the one placed under the sprawling maple tree in her backyard. The late afternoon sun filtered through the golden leaves, casting dancing shadows across her hands, which now bore the faint scars and calluses of a woman who had chosen to build her own path. The breeze carried the songs of birds nesting in the birdhouse she'd hung months ago, a symbol of her quiet revolution. For so long, Helen had felt invisible, an aging woman fading into the background, her dreams lost to time, her voice silenced by doubt and fear. Now, she was more visible than she had been in years, not because of fame or fortune, but because she had reclaimed her story and rewritten what it meant to grow older. The journey had been anything but easy. There were nights when she questioned every choice, mornings when the pain in her joints made even the simplest tasks feel insurmountable. Yet through it all, she kept moving forward, one step at a time. Helen thought about the moment it all changed, the spark lit by Elon Musk's words about persistence, risk, and defying limitations. Those words had been the catalyst, but the true transformation had come from within, from the courage to act despite fear and uncertainty. She reflected on the small choices that had accumulated into something greater, cleaning out the garage, building the birdhouse, sharing her writing, reconnecting with her son, stepping onto that stage and speaking her truth. Each act was a brick in the foundation of a new legacy, one built not on achievements or accolades, but on resilience, hope, and the refusal to be defined by age. Helen's life had shifted from one of quiet resignation to active creation. She had become part of a community of older adults embracing reinvention and self-expression. Her blog continued to grow, filled with stories from readers who found inspiration in her journey. She was no longer alone in her struggle, she was connected to a network of voices reclaiming their power. The legacy Helen was building was not about grandeur but about meaning. She wanted to leave behind a message, that life could be lived fully, vibrantly, and with purpose at any stage. That the years behind were not chains but stepping stones. One afternoon, Helen received a letter in the mail, a handwritten note from a young woman who had read her blog. The letter spoke of admiration, of how Helen's story had helped the writer find courage to pursue her own dreams. Tears filled Helen's eyes as she realized that the ripple effect of her choice was reaching far beyond her backyard. She understood then that legacy was not about monuments or money, but about the lives touched and the hope kindled. Helen's relationship with Mark continued to deepen. They shared conversations that went beyond surface pleasantries, exploring dreams and regrets, hopes and fears. Mark admitted he had been wrong to doubt her, and Helen forgave him, understanding that change was difficult for both of them. Together, they were rebuilding a bridge that years of silence had threatened to destroy. Helen often thought about the people she met during her talks. Older men and women who told her they had given up on themselves, who believed it was too late to start again. She wanted them to know what she had learned, that it was never too late, that the power to change lay within each of them. She dreamed of creating a space where older adults could come together to share, create, and support one another in their journeys. The legacy Helen was forging was one of empowerment, encouraging others to believe in themselves and take the first step, no matter how small. On a quiet evening, as she sat watching the sunset paint the sky with hues of orange and pink, Helen whispered to herself, "I was never too old. I was just waiting for permission to matter again." That realization was her gift, her truth, and her final victory. The woman who once felt forgotten had become a beacon of hope, not because she had conquered the world, but because she had conquered her own fears. Helen's story was a testament to the power of one rule: persistence. The willingness to keep moving, keep creating, keep hoping, even when the world says it's too late. Elon Musk's example had shown her what was possible when you refuse to accept limits. Helen's legacy was proof that those limits were often illusions. She closed her eyes and smiled, feeling the warmth of the sun on her face and the promise of a future still unwritten. The new chapter of her life had just begun. Helen woke early that morning, the soft light of dawn filtering through her kitchen window as birdsong filled the air. The air smelled faintly of pine and earth, a reminder that the world was still turning, still alive, and so was she. She felt a new kind of anticipation buzzing inside her, a restless energy that pushed against the old boundaries she'd carried for so long. The legacy she had begun was no longer just about herself. It was about possibility, about exploring horizons she'd never dared to reach before. Over the past months, Helen had grown in ways she hadn't imagined. The simple act of building birdhouses and benches had blossomed into something bigger, an urge to learn, to connect, to expand. One night, she had stayed up late watching a documentary about Elon Musk's ventures, his early failures, his near bankruptcies, and then his spectacular successes. What struck her most was not the fame or the fortune, but his relentless curiosity and refusal to be confined by age, expectations, or setbacks. Musk's words echoed in her mind, "When something is important enough, you do it even if the odds are not in your favor." Helen decided to apply that philosophy to her own life. She enrolled in an online course on sustainable design, something she had been curious about but never pursued. The technology intimidated her at first, the unfamiliar platforms, the jargon, the fast pace, but she tackled it the same way she had tackled the birdhouse, one small step at a time. Slowly, she began to understand how to design with purpose, how to create things that were not just beautiful but also meaningful and lasting. This new learning sparked a fresh wave of creativity. Helen sketched ideas for garden furniture made from reclaimed materials, combining her love of woodworking with a newfound commitment to sustainability. She started reaching out to local environmental groups and makerspaces, discovering communities of people who shared her passions and values. The fear of being too old started to fade, replaced by excitement about what she could still accomplish. Helen's days became filled with new rhythms, mornings dedicated to coursework, afternoons in the garage-turned studio, evenings connecting with others through video calls and forums. She felt her mind sharpening, her spirit lifting, and her confidence growing. The small victories, completing a complex design project, mastering a new software tool, receiving positive feedback from classmates, were like fuel for her soul. One afternoon, Helen received an invitation to speak at a local community center's Senior Innovators event. The organizers had found her blog and wanted her to share her story of late-life reinvention. At first, Helen hesitated. Public speaking was still daunting, and she worried about putting herself out there again. But then she remembered Musk's fearless approach, how he faced impossible odds and relentless critics without backing down. She accepted the invitation, seeing it as another opportunity to break through her own barriers. On the day of the event, Helen stood before a room filled with faces of people her age and older, men and women who had lived rich, complex lives but were still searching for new purpose. She shared her journey candidly, the regrets and loneliness, the spark from Elon Musk's example, the small projects that grew into new passions, the power of persistence. She spoke about fear, failure, and hope, weaving her story with universal truths about aging and resilience. The audience responded with warmth and enthusiasm, many coming up afterward to express their own dreams and challenges. Helen realized that her story was resonating not because it was extraordinary but because it was real, flawed, vulnerable, and deeply human. After the talk, a man named George approached her. He was a retired engineer who had always wanted to start a small business but had felt stuck. Inspired by Helen's courage, he invited her to collaborate on a community workshop teaching sustainable woodworking to seniors. Helen agreed enthusiastically, excited to combine her new skills with a desire to help others find their own paths. Together, they launched the workshop in a local church basement, turning it into a vibrant hub of creativity and connection. Week by week, the group grew, filled with people who had once felt invisible but now felt seen and valued. The workshop became more than a place to learn skills, it was a community, a family, a movement. Helen marveled at how far she'd come from the lonely kitchen where she'd once sat feeling lost. The energy in the room reminded her of Elon Musk's factory floors, buzzing with purpose and possibility. One evening, as she packed up tools after a session, Helen looked around at the smiling faces, the finished projects, the shared laughter. She felt a deep sense of fulfillment and belonging. The new horizons she had once only dreamed of were unfolding before her eyes. She was no longer waiting for permission to matter, she was creating space for herself and others to thrive. Helen knew the journey was far from over. There would still be challenges, doubts, and setbacks. But she had learned to embrace the process, to see failure as part of growth, and to keep moving forward no matter what. The future was a vast landscape of possibility, and she was ready to explore it with open eyes and an open heart. As she closed the workshop for the night, Helen whispered to herself, "This is just the beginning." The woman who had once felt forgotten was now a pioneer on new horizons, proof that it's never too late to change, to dream, to build a life worth living. Despite the momentum Helen had built, doubt was never far behind. Some mornings, she woke with a knot in her stomach, a creeping question whispering, "Is this really for me? Am I fooling myself?" The enthusiasm she'd felt after launching the workshop and sharing her story sometimes gave way to old fears, the fear of failure, the fear of being judged, the fear that age was an insurmountable barrier. She had faced these doubts before, but now they felt sharper, more insistent. One afternoon, after a particularly long day of teaching, Helen sat alone in the quiet of her garage, the tools scattered around her like silent witnesses to her struggle. The ache in her hands was a reminder that her body wasn't what it used to be. The exhaustion tugged at her resolve. What if she was too late to change? What if this new life she was building was just a fleeting dream? The words of Elon Musk echoed softly in her mind, "Persistence is very important. You should not give up unless you are forced to give up." But Helen wondered, what if she wasn't strong enough to persist? The questions gnawed at her until she almost convinced herself to quit. Then came a phone call that shook her out of the spiral. It was Mark, her son. His voice was hesitant but kind. "Mom, I've been thinking. I'm sorry if I ever made you feel like you couldn't do this. I see you now, really see you." The conversation wasn't perfect, there were silences and stumbles. But it was real, and it mattered. It reminded Helen that doubts were part of the journey, not the end of it. Later that week, Helen faced another kind of doubt, from outside voices. A few neighbors whispered that her projects were just a hobby, a passing phase. Some family members expressed concern, urging her to slow down and take it easy. The subtle dismissals stung. Society's expectations of aging were like invisible chains, binding older adults to invisibility and inactivity. Helen realized that part of her battle wasn't just internal but against a culture that often overlooked the potential of people her age. She thought of Elon Musk again, how he had faced skepticism and ridicule, how he had pushed forward despite the noise. His example gave her strength to rise above the criticism and stay true to her path. Helen also found solace in her workshop community. During one session, a fellow participant named Ruth shared her own story of doubt and resilience. Ruth had lost her husband and struggled with loneliness, but she kept coming to the workshop because she believed in the power of new beginnings. Their shared struggles created a bond, a support system that helped Helen face her fears. Together, they reminded each other that transformation was not a straight line but a winding road filled with setbacks and breakthroughs. One evening, Helen stumbled upon an old journal from her youth. Reading through her younger self's dreams and fears was both painful and inspiring. She saw the same hunger for purpose and meaning that still burned inside her. The years had brought challenges and losses, but they hadn't extinguished that spark. Helen made a promise to herself that night, to embrace the doubts without letting them define her, to keep moving forward even when the path was unclear. She knew that courage wasn't the absence of fear but the willingness to act despite it. As weeks passed, Helen learned to sit with her doubts, to acknowledge them without surrendering. She developed rituals to nurture her spirit, morning walks in the park, meditation, journaling her fears and hopes. These practices became anchors, helping her maintain balance amid uncertainty. Helen's work with the workshop evolved as well. She introduced sessions on mindfulness and emotional resilience, recognizing that transformation required not just skills but inner strength. The group grew closer, sharing stories and strategies for overcoming fear. Helen's own vulnerability became a source of inspiration, showing others that doubt was normal and conquerable. One afternoon, Helen received an invitation to appear on a local radio show to talk about aging and reinvention. The opportunity terrified her, but she accepted. During the interview, she spoke openly about her fears, the challenges of breaking free from societal expectations, and the lessons she'd learned from Elon Musk's relentless mindset. The host and listeners responded with warmth and appreciation. After the show, Helen received messages from people who said her honesty had helped them face their own doubts. That moment was a breakthrough, a reminder that authenticity could be more powerful than perfection. Helen understood that doubts would continue to surface, but she no longer saw them as enemies. They were signals, reminders to pause, reflect, and reaffirm her commitment to growth. She had become a warrior of persistence, fueled not by certainty but by hope and resilience. As autumn leaves began to fall, Helen felt a deep sense of peace. She was still on the journey, still facing challenges, but she was no longer afraid. The horizon was wide open, and she was ready to meet whatever came next with courage and grace. She whispered to herself, "I am enough. I am enough at every age, in every moment." The woman who once feared fading into obscurity was now a beacon of strength, not because she had all the answers, but because she had learned to embrace the beautiful messiness of change. Helen's life was beginning to hum with a new energy, a rhythm born from the persistent beating of hope against the walls of doubt. The doubts still lingered, but they no longer held the power to stop her. Instead, she was learning to harness them, to turn fear into fuel. One chilly morning, as frost kissed the edges of her garden, Helen awoke with a restless excitement she hadn't felt in years. She'd been invited to collaborate with a local nonprofit focused on empowering seniors through technology, a chance to bring her workshop and her newfound skills into a larger community. The prospect was daunting but thrilling. The nonprofit's mission aligned perfectly with her own desire to help others break free from the limitations society imposed on aging. Helen saw this as an opportunity not just to teach woodworking or sustainable design but to ignite a spark in others, to show them that transformation was possible at any age. She spent days preparing, poring over materials and brainstorming ideas. She wanted to create a program that combined practical skills with emotional empowerment, something that would light a fire in her students' hearts. When the first session arrived, Helen stood at the front of the room, surrounded by faces that mirrored her own, a mix of excitement, skepticism, and hope. She shared her story honestly, the loneliness, the regrets, the doubts, and the small but powerful choices that had changed her life. Then she introduced the workshop's core rule, borrowed from Elon Musk's relentless mindset: start small. Fail fast. Keep going. The room was silent for a moment, then slowly, smiles began to spread. Helen could see the spark igniting in their eyes, the flicker of possibility that comes when someone dares to believe in a new beginning. Over the weeks, the workshop became a sanctuary, a place where older adults discovered not only skills but purpose and community. Helen taught them how to use digital tools to design projects, encouraging creativity and innovation. She pushed them gently to take risks, reminding them that failure was not the end but a step toward growth. One participant, a retired schoolteacher named Joan, had struggled with depression and a sense of invisibility since retiring. She confided in Helen that she felt too old to learn new things or make a difference. Helen listened with compassion and shared her own fears, breaking down the walls between them. Together, they worked on a project building planter boxes for a local community garden. As Joan's confidence grew, so did her smile. She began to speak up in group discussions and even volunteered to lead a session. Helen saw the power of transformation unfolding in real time, proof that the spark she'd ignited in herself was now spreading. Meanwhile, Helen's blog gained traction, attracting readers from across the country who resonated with her story and message. Emails poured in from people sharing their own journeys, asking for advice, and expressing gratitude. Helen responded to each one, building a network of connection and encouragement. She realized that her legacy was no longer just local but had become part of a broader movement, a collective shift in how aging was perceived and experienced. One evening, after a long day at the workshop, Helen sat with George and Ruth, her fellow leaders. They talked about the future, how to expand their reach, how to involve more people, how to create lasting change. Ideas flowed, and plans formed. Helen felt a surge of possibility, a sense that their work was only just beginning. But with growth came new challenges. Managing the expanding programs demanded more time and energy than Helen had anticipated. There were logistical headaches, fundraising struggles, and moments when exhaustion threatened to overwhelm her. Yet, in these difficult moments, she remembered Musk's example, how he faced seemingly impossible odds with determination and a refusal to quit. Helen adopted a new mantra: focus on what matters. Let go of what doesn't. She delegated tasks, prioritized self-care, and learned to say no without guilt. This balance became crucial to sustaining her momentum. One day, while scrolling through social media, Helen stumbled upon a video of Elon Musk speaking about the importance of dreaming big and embracing failure. His words hit her with fresh force: some people don't like change, but you need to embrace change if the alternative is disaster. She paused, feeling a thrill run through her. Change was not just possible, it was necessary. Helen's own disaster had been a life of resignation, but now she was choosing transformation instead. Inspired, she decided to take a bold step. Applying for a grant to launch a pilot program bringing technology and sustainable design workshops to assisted living communities. It was a leap into unknown territory, a chance to reach people even more isolated than those she'd worked with before. The application process was rigorous, filled with moments of doubt and frustration, but Helen persisted. Weeks later, when she received the approval letter, tears filled her eyes. The validation was more than financial, it was a sign that her vision mattered, that her voice was being heard. With renewed vigor, Helen threw herself into the project. She traveled to several assisted living centers, meeting residents whose eyes lit up when she introduced the idea of learning new skills and creating together. Many had resigned themselves to boredom and loneliness, but Helen saw glimpses of hope flicker in their expressions. She encouraged them to share their stories and dreams, reminding them that their lives still held value and purpose. At one center, Helen met Margaret, an 82-year-old woman with a sharp wit and a quiet sadness. Margaret had been an artist but had given up painting after her husband died. Helen invited her to co-lead a painting workshop as part of the program. Slowly, Margaret's passion rekindled. Her paintings grew bolder, more vibrant, and her smile returned. Helen realized that her mission was bigger than she'd imagined, it was about reigniting the human spirit itself. The pilot program was a success, and word spread quickly. Helen received invitations to speak at conferences and collaborate with organizations dedicated to aging and innovation. She was becoming a recognized advocate for late-life transformation. Yet, despite the growing recognition, Helen remained grounded. She remembered the kitchen where it all began, the quiet loneliness and despair, and knew that every person she met carried their own struggles and hopes. Her role was not to fix but to inspire and empower. One crisp autumn evening, Helen sat by her window, watching the stars emerge in the deepening sky. She thought about the journey from despair to hope, from isolation to community, from silence to voice. The spark had ignited, and now it was a flame, bright, warm, and unstoppable. She whispered softly, "This is what it means to live, to grow, to become." The woman who had once felt left behind was now lighting the way for others, a living testament to the power of one simple rule: keep going, no matter what. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The morning sunlight spilled through the curtains as Helen sat at her kitchen table, a cup of coffee warming her hands but her mind restless with anticipation. Today was the day she had been preparing for, a presentation to a regional foundation that could fund the expansion of her workshops. The stakes felt high. This was more than a grant, it was validation that her late-in-life reinvention could ripple outward and transform countless lives. Helen's heart pounded as she reviewed her notes one last time. She thought back to the early days, when her world was defined by silence and regret. How far she'd come, spurred on by a spark from a man she had never met but whose mindset she had embraced, Elon Musk. His relentless pursuit of possibility, his refusal to accept limits, had become a beacon for her own journey. She reminded herself of his words, spoken in one of her favorite interviews, "When something is important enough, you do it even if the odds are not in your favor." The odds had been stacked against her for decades, age, loneliness, self-doubt, but here she was, ready to fight for a future she had claimed for herself. Helen's drive was more than personal, it was a mission to rewrite the narrative about aging, to show that transformation was not just for the young but for anyone willing to risk, to dream, to persist. Arriving at the Foundation's sleek downtown office, Helen felt the familiar flutter of nerves. She was greeted by a panel of decision-makers, their faces polite but unreadable. Taking a deep breath, she began to share her story. She spoke about the loneliness that had once enveloped her, the moments she'd felt invisible, the small steps that led her to build a community of older adults reclaiming their purpose. She described the workshops, how they fuse technology, creativity, and emotional resilience, and the impact on participants like Joan and Margaret, whose lives had been transformed. Throughout the presentation, Helen's voice grew stronger. She laid out her vision for the pilot program's expansion, backed by heartfelt stories and concrete plans. She emphasized the power of persistence, the importance of challenging stereotypes, and the ripple effect of hope. As she concluded, the room remained silent for a moment that felt like an eternity. Then, one panelist leaned forward, a smile breaking through the professional mask. "Helen, your story is inspiring. This project is exactly the kind of innovation we want to support. We see tremendous potential." The others nodded in agreement. Relief and joy flooded Helen's chest. Tears pricked her eyes, not just because of the funding but because of the recognition that her journey mattered. The breakthrough was not just financial, it was a profound acknowledgement of her worth and purpose. Returning home, Helen felt lighter, buoyed by the possibilities ahead. She shared the news with George and Ruth, who embraced her with pride and excitement. The workshop would grow, reaching more communities, touching more lives. But amid the celebration, Helen remained mindful of the journey's core lesson: transformation was ongoing. She was not done learning, growing, or pushing boundaries. One afternoon, as Helen prepared materials for a new workshop, her phone buzzed with an unexpected message. It was from her son, Mark. "Mom, I've been thinking about everything you're doing. I want to help. Can we talk?" The invitation caught Helen off guard. Their relationship had been distant for years, marked by unspoken hurts and misunderstandings. But now, a door was opening. They arranged to meet at a quiet cafe, the kind of place where conversations could unfold slowly, gently. Over coffee, Mark shared his own struggles, career disappointments, feelings of aimlessness, and how her story had given him hope. Helen listened with an open heart, realizing that their pain was intertwined but so was their potential for healing. They talked late into the afternoon, bridging years of silence with honesty and forgiveness. It was not a perfect reunion, but it was a start. Helen felt a deep sense of peace and possibility. Her transformation was touching not just strangers but those closest to her. Inspired by this breakthrough, Helen began writing a series of essays about aging, resilience, and reinvention, weaving in lessons from Elon Musk and her own life. The essays struck a chord, published online and shared widely. Messages poured in from readers across the country, many sharing their own stories of struggle and hope. Helen responded to as many as she could, fostering a virtual community of late bloomers determined to rewrite their stories. Meanwhile, the expanded workshops were underway, and Helen found herself traveling to new towns and cities, meeting seniors eager to learn, to connect, to create. She marveled at the diversity and strength she encountered, the engineers, artists, teachers, and dreamers who refused to fade away. One day, after a workshop in a small rural town, a woman named Gloria approached Helen with tears in her eyes. Gloria had been caring for her aging parents and felt drained and invisible. Helen listened as Gloria shared her fears of being stuck in a life of sacrifice and solitude. Helen encouraged her to join the workshop, to reclaim some space for herself. Over the next weeks, Gloria blossomed, finding joy in crafting and community. Helen realized that her work was about more than skills, it was about restoring dignity and hope. As Helen reflected on her journey, she recognized that the breakthrough moment was not a single event but a series of small victories, each a flame kindled by courage and persistence. The Foundation's grant, her reconnection with Mark, the growth of her community, they were threads weaving a tapestry of transformation. She thought back to the moment when she first felt invisible, the day she stumbled upon Elon Musk's words and began to believe in change again. That moment had sparked a revolution within her, a revolution that now extended far beyond her own life. Helen whispered softly, "This is just the beginning." The woman who had once been defined by fear and regret was now a catalyst for hope and change, proving that it's never too late to ignite your spark and shine. The days after the breakthrough grant felt like a whirlwind, but Helen welcomed the surge of energy and purpose. She understood that momentum was fragile and had to be nurtured carefully. With George and Ruth by her side, they began designing the next phase of the program, one that would build bridges between generations, communities, and experiences. Helen believed that true transformation wasn't just about individual change but about connection and shared purpose. She wanted to create spaces where older adults could not only learn and grow but also inspire and be inspired by younger generations. The idea came to her one evening while watching a documentary about Elon Musk's early days, how he had leveraged collaboration and learning from diverse minds to propel his visions forward. That same principle could apply to her work. She envisioned intergenerational workshops where seniors and young people would come together to share skills, stories, and dreams. With this new vision, Helen reached out to a local high school. She spoke to the principal about her idea, emphasizing the power of cross-generational learning and the potential to break down stereotypes about aging. The principal was intrigued and agreed to pilot a program pairing seniors with high school students for collaborative projects. The first meeting was awkward but promising. Seniors and teens sat in circles, hesitant but curious. Helen opened the session by sharing her journey, her struggles with feeling invisible and irrelevant, and how embracing change had transformed her life. She encouraged everyone to share one hope and one fear about aging and change. As stories unfolded, barriers began to dissolve. The teens confessed fears about their futures and the pressure to have it all figured out. The seniors admitted worries about being forgotten and losing purpose. But amid the vulnerability, a profound empathy grew. Helen watched as a shy teenager named Emily helped George set up a digital design program. In turn, George shared woodworking tips that fascinated Emily. Across the room, Ruth and a group of students brainstormed ideas for community art projects, blending old techniques with new technology. The exchange was electric, a fusion of wisdom and curiosity. Over weeks, the workshops flourished. Helen witnessed transformations not only in the seniors but in the teens, who began to see aging as a phase of potential rather than decline. The seniors, in turn, felt renewed vitality from the energy and fresh perspectives the young people brought. One afternoon, a breakthrough happened during a project where students and seniors collaborated to design and build a sustainable community garden. The garden became a living symbol of their shared effort, growth, and hope. Helen felt tears prick her eyes as the group celebrated the first harvest together, a tangible reminder that life, no matter the stage, could yield beauty and abundance. Helen's blog captured these moments, stories of connection and growth that resonated deeply with her growing audience. She received messages from readers inspired to start their own intergenerational projects. The ripple effect was spreading. As the program gained attention, Helen was invited to speak at a national conference on aging innovation. Standing before a packed auditorium, she shared the story of building bridges between generations. She spoke candidly about the loneliness that often shadows aging and the transformative power of connection. She quoted Elon Musk's fearless approach to challenges and innovation, reminding the audience that courage and persistence were ageless qualities. The response was overwhelming. Attendees approached Helen with ideas, offers to collaborate, and heartfelt thanks. She realized that her message was striking a chord far beyond her community. But amidst the excitement, Helen remained grounded in the everyday realities. There were logistical hurdles, moments of exhaustion, and times when old doubts resurfaced. Yet, the support of her friends, family, and newfound community gave her strength. She learned to delegate, to ask for help, and to cherish moments of rest. One evening, after a long day of planning, Helen received a visit from Mark. He brought his guitar and shared songs he'd written, inspired by the changes he'd seen in her. Their bond deepened, healing years of distance and misunderstanding. Helen marveled at how their relationship mirrored the very bridges she was building in her work. The future felt full of possibility, woven together by threads of resilience, connection, and hope. Helen's story was no longer just her own, it had become a tapestry of lives intertwined, proof that transformation was a collective journey. As autumn deepened, Helen stood in a community garden, watching a group of seniors and teens laughing together, their hands tending the earth. The scent of soil and the crisp air filled her senses. She whispered a quiet thanks to the journey that had brought her here, the moments of doubt and courage, the small choices that had built a new legacy. She knew there would be challenges ahead, but also that the spark inside her and those she touched would keep burning bright. The woman who once feared fading had become a bridge, a living testament to the power of change, connection, and unwavering hope. Even as the gardens flourished and the bridges between generations grew stronger, shadows lingered in Helen's world, whispers of fear, self-doubt, and the persistent ache of years lost. Transformation, she was learning, was never a straight path. The darkness could return without warning, challenging the light she had fought so hard to kindle. One gray afternoon, Helen found herself alone in her workshop, the familiar smell of sawdust and varnish mingling with a quiet unease. A letter from her doctor sat unopened on the table, its presence a stark reminder of her physical fragility. The test results had been worrying, nothing catastrophic, but enough to unsettle her peace. Helen's heart sank as she wrestled with a flood of emotions, fear of decline, the old voice whispering that maybe she was too late, too tired to keep pushing forward. She thought about Elon Musk's relentless drive, the way he faced setbacks with fierce determination, yet even he was human, prone to doubt and pain. Helen realized that courage wasn't the absence of fear but the decision to move forward despite it. That night, sleep eluded her. Memories surfaced, times when she had chosen safety over risk, when she had closed doors instead of opening them. The weight of years pressed down, and for a moment, the spark flickered. The next morning, Helen took a walk in the garden, her steps slower than usual. She watched as the community tended to the plants, laughter and conversation filling the air. The sight warmed her, but the ache inside remained. She confided in Ruth, who listened without judgment, reminding Helen that vulnerability was part of strength. "It's okay to feel scared," Ruth said softly. "It means you care. It means you're human." Helen nodded, realizing she had been holding herself to impossible standards, expecting constant progress without pauses or setbacks. That day, she decided to face her shadows head-on. She called her doctor's office and scheduled a follow-up appointment, determined to be informed and proactive. She also reached out to a counselor recommended by a friend, someone who specialized in working with older adults grappling with life transitions. The sessions became a safe space where Helen unpacked years of grief and fear. She confronted regrets but also discovered resilience buried beneath pain. Her counselor helped her reframe her story, not as one of loss but of continuous growth. Inspired, Helen began writing a new series of blog posts focused on the realities of aging, not just the triumphs but the struggles too. She shared her own fears and doubts candidly, hoping to break the silence that often isolated seniors in their darkest moments. The response was immediate and profound. Readers reached out, thanking her for honesty, sharing their own battles with health, loneliness, and fear. Helen realized that by facing her shadows, she was lighting the way for others to do the same. Meanwhile, the workshop community rallied around her. Participants offered support and encouragement, reminding Helen that she was not alone. The bonds forged through shared vulnerability became a source of strength. In one powerful moment, Joan, once shy and withdrawn, stood before the group to share her journey through depression and healing. Her words moved many to tears, including Helen's. The room became a sanctuary of empathy and courage. Helen's son Mark, too, played a vital role in this chapter of her life. Their renewed relationship deepened as they navigated his own struggles with anxiety and uncertainty. Helen found that her journey of transformation was intertwined with his, each of them learning from the other. Together, they attended counseling sessions, supported community events, and dreamed of new projects that blended their talents and passions. As winter approached, Helen faced her health challenges with a balanced mindset, accepting help when needed, adjusting her goals, but never relinquishing her core mission. She embraced Elon Musk's unyielding spirit but tempered it with compassion for herself. One evening, Helen received a message from a follower of her blog, a man named David who had recently lost his wife and felt adrift in grief. He wrote that Helen's honesty about facing shadows gave him hope that he could find purpose again. Moved, Helen invited David to join the workshop, where he slowly found community and healing. This new connection reminded Helen that her work was about more than projects and programs, it was about restoring humanity and dignity to those navigating the twilight of their lives. The chapter of shadows was not a detour but a vital part of her story, one that deepened her empathy and reinforced her commitment to authentic, courageous living. As Helen sat by her window one quiet evening, watching snowflakes drift against the dark sky, she whispered a new truth: I am not my fears. I am the light that keeps shining through. The woman who had once been lost in shadows was now a beacon, proof that even in the darkest moments, transformation was possible, and hope was never out of reach. Helen woke early, the quiet hum of dawn stirring the small town outside her window. The chill of winter still clung to the air, but inside, a fire of determination burned steady. She thought about the journey so far, every setback, every spark of hope, and realized the one thread running through it all was persistence. The refusal to give up, to keep pushing even when the road seemed impossible. Inspired by Elon Musk's own relentless pursuit of his dreams despite countless obstacles, Helen knew this was the force that would carry her forward. Her morning routine was simple but purposeful. She brewed coffee, reviewed notes for the upcoming workshop, and took a few moments to visualize the impact she wanted to make. She pictured the faces of the seniors and teens who had become like family, each person a testament to the power of resilience. Over the years, Helen had learned that persistence wasn't about blind stubbornness. It was about adapting, learning from failure, and staying true to one's purpose even when progress was slow or invisible. There had been days when she felt like giving up, when funding fell through, or a workshop had poor attendance, or old fears crept in like shadows. But each time, something inside nudged her to try again, to take one more step. On this day, Helen faced a fresh challenge. The foundation that had funded her initial expansion had expressed concerns about long-term sustainability and wanted proof that the program could thrive independently. It was a critical juncture. Helen spent hours analyzing budgets, gathering testimonials, and drafting a proposal that outlined a sustainable model blending community partnerships, volunteer involvement, and local business sponsorships. The work was exhausting, but Helen found comfort in the process. She thought about Elon Musk's words: persistence is very important. You should not give up unless you are forced to give up. She refused to be forced to quit. As she submitted the proposal, Helen reflected on the lessons persistence had taught her beyond funding and programs. It had built her character, deepened her empathy, and forged connections that money couldn't buy. Persistence had helped her face fears of aging and irrelevance, turning them into fuel for change. That evening, Helen attended a community gathering where seniors shared stories and celebrated milestones. She listened as Joan recounted how the workshops had helped her reconnect with her passion for painting after decades of putting it aside. Margaret spoke about learning to use new technology to communicate with distant family members. Each story was a victory born of persistence, small triumphs that added up to a movement. Helen felt a swell of pride and humility. She was part of something bigger than herself, a living proof that persistence could break through barriers of age, fear, and doubt. At home, Helen's relationship with Mark continued to deepen. They brainstormed ideas for a joint project, a digital archive capturing stories of transformation from workshop participants. It would be a way to preserve legacy and inspire others. The work was challenging, requiring new skills and patience, but they persisted together. One night, Mark surprised Helen with a simple gift, a framed quote from Elon Musk: "When something is important enough, you do it even if the odds are not in your favor." Helen hung it on her wall, a daily reminder that persistence was a form of love, love for one's dreams, one's community, and oneself. As spring approached, Helen launched a new initiative, a monthly speaker series featuring seniors who had reinvented themselves. The events drew diverse crowds, sparking conversations and breaking down stereotypes. Helen was amazed by the power of stories to inspire and unite. Yet, persistence wasn't without its toll. There were nights when exhaustion weighed heavily, and doubts whispered that maybe she was chasing a dream too big for her time. But in those moments, Helen returned to the garden, the living symbol of growth and renewal. She tended the plants with care, reminded that life was a cycle of seasons, each requiring patience and faith. One afternoon, a young woman named Sarah joined the workshop. Sarah was caring for her aging grandmother and struggling with burnout and guilt. Helen listened and offered gentle encouragement, sharing her own story of persistence through hardships. Sarah stayed on, becoming a volunteer and a bridge to a new generation. Watching Sarah blossom reminded Helen that persistence was contagious. It sparked hope and action in others. The chapter of persistence was more than a story of personal grit, it was a movement of hearts and minds united by a refusal to accept limits. Helen's transformation was ongoing, fueled by the steady flame of persistence that burned through setbacks, fear, and fatigue. As she looked out at the vibrant community she had helped nurture, Helen whispered a quiet vow: to keep moving forward, to keep believing, and to keep inspiring others to do the same. The woman who once feared fading into obscurity was now a force of nature, a living testament to the power of persistence to rewrite the story of aging and purpose. Helen never imagined that a chance encounter would shift her journey yet again. It happened on a chilly spring morning, the kind that made the promise of new beginnings feel tangible. She was at a local bookstore, browsing the shelves for inspiration when a familiar face appeared: Martin Reed, a retired engineer she'd met years ago at a community event. Martin was in his late 70s, sharp-eyed and spry, with a quiet confidence that reminded Helen of the best qualities she admired in Elon Musk: curiosity, boldness, and a restless mind. They struck up a conversation, sharing stories about the workshops, the garden, and the challenges of aging with purpose. Martin listened intently, nodding thoughtfully. Then he surprised Helen by offering to help her with a project he thought might elevate her work: creating a digital platform to connect seniors across the country, sharing resources, stories, and encouragement. Helen was skeptical at first. The idea seemed daunting, and technology was still a frontier she navigated cautiously. But Martin's enthusiasm was infectious, and she found herself saying yes. Over the following weeks, Martin became an unexpected mentor. His engineering background and patient teaching style complemented Helen's vision and leadership. They spent hours planning, sketching wireframes, and learning coding basics. Helen marveled at how this collaboration breathed new life into her mission, opening doors she hadn't imagined. Martin shared stories of his own reinvention after retirement. How he had started learning digital design at 65, pushing past fears and doubts much like Helen had. His resilience and humility inspired her, reinforcing that transformation was lifelong and communal. Their partnership sparked a fresh wave of creativity and determination. Helen's workshops began incorporating tech tutorials led by Martin, empowering seniors to engage confidently with digital tools. The community grew, reaching beyond local boundaries. The digital platform, named Bridges, became a hub of connection and innovation, a testament to the power of mentorship and collaboration. Helen's blog chronicled this new chapter, her journey with Martin and the evolving community. Readers responded enthusiastically, many inspired to seek their own mentors or become mentors themselves. The ripple effect was clear. Yet, the journey wasn't without challenges. Technical glitches, funding needs, and occasional frustrations tested their resolve. But Helen and Martin leaned into these moments, problem-solving together, learning from mistakes, and celebrating small victories. Through it all, Helen recognized a deeper truth: mentorship wasn't just about knowledge transfer, it was about trust, encouragement, and shared vision. Martin's belief in her sparked a confidence that transcended any technical skill. In turn, Helen's passion and openness reminded Martin of his own capacity to grow and contribute. One afternoon, as they reviewed user feedback on the Bridges platform, Helen felt a surge of gratitude. This unexpected mentor had expanded her horizons and deepened her understanding of community and purpose. She realized that no matter the stage of life, growth often came from the connections we dared to make. Helen's son Mark noticed the transformation too. He saw his mother energized, curious, and deeply engaged in something bigger than herself. Their bond grew stronger as Mark joined the Bridges project, bringing fresh ideas and youthful energy. Together, the three of them, Helen, Martin, and Mark, formed a dynamic team, blending experience, wisdom, and innovation. The community watched with admiration as this intergenerational, inter-expertise collaboration thrived. Helen often reflected on Elon Musk's role as a symbolic guide in her journey. Musk's fearlessness in exploring new frontiers and embracing failure had been a spark for her own courage. Now, with Martin's mentorship and Mark's partnership, she was living that fearless exploration every day. The chapter of the unexpected mentor was a powerful reminder that transformation often required opening one's heart and mind to new relationships. It was about humility and trust, about receiving help as much as giving it. Helen understood that aging was not a barrier but a bridge, to new knowledge, new friendships, and new dreams. One evening, after a particularly successful community event showcasing the Bridges platform, Helen sat quietly with Martin. The sun set behind the town's familiar skyline, casting a golden glow over the garden they had nurtured together. Martin smiled, his eyes twinkling with satisfaction and hope. "Helen," he said softly, "you've built something incredible here. It's more than a program or a platform. It's a movement." Helen felt tears prick her eyes. "I couldn't have done it without you," she replied. "Or without all the people who believed in me when I didn't believe in myself." They sat in companionable silence, grateful for the unexpected mentor who had become a friend and partner. Helen's journey had taught her that no matter the obstacles or the years behind her, the capacity to learn, to teach, and to connect was infinite. The woman who once felt invisible and stuck was now a beacon of possibility, proof that the right mentor, the right moment, and the right mindset could open doors to a new legacy. Helen had always found comfort in routine, the steady rhythms of her days, the familiar faces in her community, the predictable flow of seasons. Yet, as her journey unfolded, she realized that embracing the unknown was essential to growth. Elon Musk's fearless dives into uncharted territories had been a guiding light, inspiring Helen to see uncertainty not as a threat but as an opportunity. One spring morning, Helen stood at the edge of the community garden, watching the first buds of new life push through the earth. The garden was thriving, a living symbol of transformation, but Helen knew the next phase of her work would require stepping far beyond her comfort zone. The Bridges platform was gaining momentum, and the team had been invited to present at a national conference on aging and technology in San Francisco. The opportunity thrilled Helen, but also stirred deep anxieties. Traveling alone, speaking before a large audience, navigating unfamiliar technology and crowds, these challenges felt daunting. Yet Helen understood that embracing the unknown was part of the path she had chosen. She recalled Elon Musk's words, "When something is important enough, you do it even if the odds are not in your favor." With a deep breath, Helen accepted the invitation. The weeks leading up to the conference were a whirlwind of preparation. Helen rehearsed her speech countless times, coordinated with Martin and Mark on the platform demo, and arranged logistics. The support of her community was unwavering, offering encouragement and practical help. As the day of departure arrived, Helen packed her bags with a mix of excitement and nervousness. The airport buzzed with activity, a stark contrast to the quiet life she knew. Yet Helen felt a steady determination. She was no longer the woman who feared fading into the background. The conference was a kaleidoscope of ideas, innovation, and stories of transformation. Helen met people from all over the country, scientists, activists, entrepreneurs, and fellow seniors who were challenging the stereotypes of aging. Each conversation sparked new inspiration. When Helen took the stage to share the story of bridges, she spoke from the heart. She told of her own journey, from fear and invisibility to courage and connection, and of the power of community to rewrite what it means to grow older. The audience responded with warmth and applause. Later, during the Q&A, Helen faced tough questions about technology, funding, and scalability. Her answers were honest and grounded, reflecting both challenges and hopes. She realized that embracing the unknown didn't mean having all the answers but being willing to learn, adapt, and persist. One evening, after a busy day of sessions, Helen wandered the city streets. The lights and sounds were overwhelming yet exhilarating. She felt a surge of gratitude for the journey that had brought her here, the risks taken, the fears confronted, the connections made. In a quiet cafe, she struck up a conversation with a young woman named Anna, an app developer passionate about designing accessible technology for older adults. Their exchange sparked an idea to further enhance the Bridges platform with user-friendly features. Helen felt the thrill of new possibilities. Returning home, Helen carried the energy and lessons of the conference into her work. She shared stories with her community, inspiring others to take their own leaps into the unknown. The experience deepened her belief that transformation was a lifelong journey, fueled by curiosity and courage. Yet embracing the unknown also meant accepting vulnerability. Helen had moments of doubt, wondering if she was too old to keep chasing new horizons, if her energy would hold out. But she learned to honor these feelings without letting them dictate her path. She practiced mindfulness, took breaks when needed, and leaned on her support network. One afternoon, Helen received a call from an old friend she hadn't spoken to in years. Their conversation was tentative at first but grew warmer, rekindling a bond that time and distance had frayed. This unexpected reconnection reminded Helen that embracing the unknown also meant opening doors to healing and reconciliation. As spring gave way to summer, Helen found herself standing once again in the community garden, now a lush tapestry of growth. She thought about the seed sown, not just in soil, but in hearts and minds. The woman who had feared fading was now a beacon of possibility, a living testament to the power of embracing uncertainty with grace and grit. Helen whispered a promise to herself, to keep stepping into the unknown, trusting that every new path held the potential for discovery, connection, and renewal. The journey was far from over, but Helen was ready to face whatever came next with an open heart and unwavering hope. Helen had learned that transformation wasn't just about personal growth, it was about healing the fractures that time and life had left behind. After embracing the unknown, she turned her attention to something deeply personal and often painful, rebuilding bridges with those she loved but had lost touch with. The first bridge she sought to repair was the one with her estranged sister, Diane. Years of silence had stretched between them, woven with regrets and misunderstandings that neither had the courage to address. Helen remembered the ache of those lost years, the holidays spent alone, the unanswered letters. She was not naive, she knew rebuilding wouldn't be easy. But inspired by Elon Musk's philosophy of confronting problems head-on and learning from failures, Helen decided to reach out. She wrote Diane a letter, honest and heartfelt, sharing her journey of change, her hopes for reconciliation, and an invitation to meet. Days passed with no reply, and doubt crept in, whispering that maybe the past was too fractured to mend. Then, one afternoon, Diane called. Her voice was hesitant but warm. They arranged to meet at a quiet cafe in town. The reunion was tentative at first, awkward smiles, careful words, but as they talked, years of pain began to unravel. They shared stories of hardship, loss, and the ways life had changed them. Tears came, apologies were spoken, and slowly, the sisterly bond began to heal. Rebuilding this bridge was not about erasing the past but creating a new foundation built on honesty, vulnerability, and love. This deeply emotional reconciliation inspired Helen to consider other broken connections. She reached out to old friends, neighbors, and even distant relatives. Some responded warmly, others with hesitation, but Helen understood that healing was a process, not a guarantee. The bridge's platform she and Martin had built took on new significance as a tool not just for connection but for restoration. Helen began organizing workshops focused on communication, forgiveness, and rebuilding relationships. These sessions brought together people from diverse backgrounds, each carrying their own stories of loss and hope. In one memorable workshop, a man shared how he had reconciled with his estranged son after decades apart. His story touched many hearts and sparked conversations that rippled beyond the room. Helen saw firsthand the transformative power of rebuilding bridges, not just to others but within oneself. The process required courage, patience, and a willingness to face uncomfortable truths. Helen often reflected on Elon Musk's fearless approach to challenges, his readiness to pivot, fail, and try again. She applied that mindset to relationships, learning that persistence in love could heal wounds thought permanent. Meanwhile, Helen's relationship with her son Mark deepened through this journey. They navigated their own past misunderstandings with openness and forgiveness. Together, they planned a family reunion, inviting those they had reconnected with. The event was a celebration of renewal, filled with laughter, stories, and the warmth of belonging. Helen's blog featured a series on rebuilding relationships, resonating with readers who found solace and inspiration in her words. Messages poured in, stories of reunions, forgiveness, and newfound hope. Helen realized that the work of rebuilding bridges was a vital part of the legacy she was creating. One day, as Helen prepared for a workshop, she received a surprising invitation from a local school to speak about her journey. The opportunity thrilled her. She saw it as a chance to bridge generations, to share the wisdom of persistence, courage, and reconciliation with young people navigating their own paths. At the school, Helen spoke candidly about aging, transformation, and the importance of mending relationships. She shared how even after 60, life could offer new beginnings. The students listened intently, many moved by her honesty and vitality. Afterward, several approached her, asking questions and sharing their own stories. Helen felt the power of connection spanned generations, a living bridge of understanding and hope. The work of rebuilding bridges extended beyond personal relationships. Helen advocated for community initiatives promoting dialogue and unity across divides. She partnered with local leaders to host forums addressing issues of ageism, isolation, and inclusion. These efforts nurtured a stronger, more compassionate community. Throughout this chapter of her life, Helen confronted the fears that had once held her back, the fear of rejection, failure, and vulnerability. She found that embracing these fears was essential to rebuilding bridges that could withstand the storms of time. Helen's journey showed that no matter the distance or damage, the heart's capacity to heal was vast. The woman who once felt invisible and disconnected was now a beacon of reconciliation and hope. As she stood once again in her beloved garden, watching the blooms that symbolized growth and renewal, Helen whispered, "Bridges broken can be rebuilt stronger." Love, persistence, and courage make it possible. The legacy she was creating was not just about projects or platforms but about mending the ties that bind us all, across families, communities, and generations. Helen's story was a testament to the truth that it is never too late to heal, reconnect, and embrace the fullness of life. Helen sat quietly in her favorite armchair, the soft glow of the late afternoon sun filtering through the window and casting warm patterns across the worn pages of a notebook. It was filled with sketches and ideas, dreams she had shelved long ago, convinced they belonged to a younger version of herself. For years, she had lived cautiously, guided by routines and the gentle wisdom of survival. Yet deep inside, a spark had begun to flicker, fueled by her journey of transformation and the inspiration drawn from Elon Musk's bold vision of dreaming beyond limits. That evening, Helen allowed herself to dream again, not just small wishes or fleeting hopes, but grand ideas that stirred her heart and challenged her fears. She pictured herself launching a community makerspace, a place where seniors could tinker, invent, and learn new skills alongside younger generations. The vision was thrilling yet intimidating. What if she failed? What if she was too old? But the embers of courage, stoked over years of persistence and growth, pushed her forward. Helen shared the idea with Martin and Mark, who embraced it with enthusiasm and support. Together, they began outlining plans, scouting potential locations, and envisioning programs. The process was exhilarating, filled with brainstorming, setbacks, and small victories. Helen realized that courage was not the absence of fear, but the resolve to act despite it. The community responded with curiosity and encouragement. Local businesses offered donations of tools and materials, while volunteers signed up to teach classes. Helen organized fundraisers and spoke at town meetings, sharing her vision with passion and conviction. The dream was becoming tangible. Yet, Helen also faced moments of self-doubt. There were days when the weight of responsibility and the unpredictability of the endeavor felt overwhelming. She reminded herself of Elon Musk's approach, embracing failure as a step toward success, learning rapidly, and iterating. She practiced kindness toward herself, recognizing that courage was a muscle strengthened by action and patience. As the makerspace took shape, Helen watched people from all walks of life come together, retirees rediscovering creativity, teens gaining mentorship, families bonding through shared projects. The space became a vibrant hub of innovation and connection, a living testament to the power of dreaming boldly at any age. Helen's blog captured the journey in vivid detail, inspiring readers across the country. Messages poured in from people who felt emboldened to pursue their own long-held dreams. The makerspace became more than a physical space, it was a symbol of possibility, renewal, and community. One day, during a workshop on woodworking, a young man named Lucas approached Helen. He was a college student studying engineering, passionate but unsure of his future. Helen shared her story of late-in-life transformation, encouraging him to embrace uncertainty and keep dreaming. Their conversation blossomed into a mentorship that bridged generations, each learning from the other. Helen marveled at how courage to dream again could ripple outward, igniting hope and action in unexpected ways. Meanwhile, Helen's relationship with Diane deepened as they collaborated on creative projects at the makerspace. The sisters discovered new common ground, healing old wounds through shared purpose. Helen felt the fullness of life in these moments, the blending of past and present, of dreams and reality. As summer turned to fall, Helen stood at the grand opening of the makerspace, surrounded by friends, family, and community members. The air was alive with excitement and gratitude. She took a moment to reflect on the journey that had brought her here, from fear and invisibility to courage and impact. Elon Musk's words echoed in her mind, "Some people don't like change, but you need to embrace change if the alternative is disaster." Helen knew that embracing change meant embracing herself, her fears, hopes, and endless capacity to grow. The courage to dream again was not a fleeting moment but a lifelong practice, a commitment to living fully despite uncertainty. Helen's story was a beacon for anyone who thought it was too late to start anew, a reminder that dreams are timeless and courage is within reach. As the celebration continued, Helen looked around at the smiling faces, the energy buzzing in the room, and whispered to herself, "I am never too old to dream." The journey of transformation was far from over, but Helen was ready to keep dreaming, creating, and inspiring, knowing that the best was yet to come. Helen had come to understand that persistence was the invisible thread weaving her transformation together. It was what kept her moving forward when doubts whispered she was too old, too tired, or too insignificant to matter. Persistence was not a dramatic, singular act of heroism, it was the daily choice to show up, to try again, to keep believing in herself and the work she had started. Inspired by Elon Musk's relentless drive through setbacks, Helen embraced persistence as a lifestyle. The makerspace was thriving, but with growth came new challenges, funding gaps, technical hurdles, and the natural weariness of juggling multiple roles. At times, Helen felt the weight of responsibility press down hard. There were moments when she questioned whether her vision was sustainable, whether the community would continue to engage, or if her own energy could hold out. Yet each time, she remembered Musk's example of persevering through near bankruptcy, public criticism, and personal sacrifice. She reminded herself that failure was not the end but a step toward learning and growth. Helen's days were filled with problem-solving and resilience. When the makerspace suffered a costly equipment failure, she rallied volunteers for repairs and launched a crowdfunding campaign that not only replaced the tools but also deepened community investment. When attendance dipped during the winter months, Helen organized outreach events, partnering with local organizations to bring new participants through the doors. Each obstacle became a chance to reinforce her commitment and adapt her approach. Helen's persistence was contagious. Martin and Mark, inspired by her tenacity, redoubled their efforts. Volunteers stayed engaged, and newcomers brought fresh energy and ideas. The makerspace became more than a project, it was a movement fueled by collective perseverance. Outside the makerspace, Helen continued to nurture personal growth and relationships. Rebuilding bridges with Diane and others was ongoing work, requiring patience and understanding. Helen learned to persist not only in her public endeavors but in her private healing. One afternoon, Helen received a letter from a reader of her blog, a man named George who shared how her story had inspired him to reconnect with his own estranged father. The letter was raw and heartfelt, filled with gratitude and hope. It reminded Helen that persistence in telling her story was creating ripples far beyond her immediate circle. Helen's journey showed that persistence wasn't about perfection or grand gestures. It was about embracing imperfection, showing up even when the path was uncertain, and choosing to keep going when giving up felt easier. She often reflected on a quote from Elon Musk that had become her mantra: "Persistence is very important. You should not give up unless you are forced to give up." Helen lived those words every day. During a community event marking the Makerspace's first anniversary, Helen spoke openly about the power of persistence. She shared stories of setbacks and small wins, emphasizing that transformation was a marathon, not a sprint. The audience responded with heartfelt applause, many moved by her honesty and resilience. Helen's blog featured a series titled "Persistence in Action," spotlighting stories of seniors who had overcome obstacles to pursue new passions. The series resonated widely, sparking conversations about aging, determination, and possibility. Helen's own health presented another test of persistence. She faced a scare that required surgery and a challenging recovery. The experience was humbling but also a profound lesson in self-care and grit. Helen allowed herself to slow down without losing sight of her purpose. She adapted her role, empowering others to step up and lead, demonstrating that persistence also meant knowing when to ask for help and delegate. In moments of vulnerability, Helen's community rallied around her, reflecting the deep connections she had nurtured. Through every twist and turn, Helen's commitment never wavered. She realized that persistence was intertwined with hope, it was hope in action. Each day she chose to persist was a declaration that she mattered, that her dreams and contributions had value. Helen's story became a beacon for those who feared fading or losing relevance. She showed that persistence could reclaim purpose and open doors to unexpected joy and impact. As winter thawed into spring, Helen stood once again in her garden, now bursting with new blooms. She reflected on how far she had come, from the woman who once felt invisible to a leader inspiring a community. Persistence had transformed her life, making the impossible possible. Helen whispered softly to the breeze, "I will keep going, no matter what." The journey was far from over, but Helen was ready to face whatever came next with unwavering persistence, courage, and hope. Helen had spent much of her life wondering if she would leave behind anything meaningful, a legacy that mattered beyond the quiet walls of her home and the passing moments of her days. But through her journey, she discovered that legacy wasn't about grand monuments or vast fortunes, it was about the ripples of change one person could create in the lives of others. Inspired by Elon Musk's relentless drive to shape the future, Helen realized that leaving a legacy meant embracing change, empowering others, and showing that transformation was possible at any age. The makerspace had become a beacon in the community, a place where creativity, connection, and courage blossomed. Helen often reflected on the people who had walked through its doors, seniors reclaiming purpose, youth finding mentors, families discovering joy in collaboration. Each story was a thread in the legacy she was weaving. Helen's blog had grown into a platform where voices of transformation and hope were amplified. Her honest reflections, stories of resilience, and practical wisdom reached readers far beyond her town, inspiring a movement of older adults reclaiming their power. Helen understood that her legacy wasn't a fixed destination but a living, evolving force fueled by action and connection. She began mentoring others who wanted to start similar initiatives, sharing lessons learned and encouraging bold steps. One day, Helen received a letter from a woman named Gloria, a retired teacher who was launching a community art project inspired by Helen's story. The letter was filled with gratitude and determination. Helen felt a profound sense of fulfillment knowing her journey had sparked change in another's life. Helen's family became part of her legacy story as well. Diane, Mark, and Martin all embraced the vision of ongoing transformation and community building. They supported each other's growth, healing old wounds and forging new bonds. Helen's reconciliation with her sister became a powerful example of how legacy was not just about achievements but about love and forgiveness passed down through generations. In her quieter moments, Helen reflected on the lessons that had shaped her legacy. She thought of the fear she once felt, the fear of fading, of being forgotten, of being too old to matter. Those fears had been met and transformed by courage, persistence, and the willingness to embrace change. She realized that legacy was about breaking cycles of doubt and limitation, offering a new narrative of possibility and hope. Helen's community recognized her contributions with a special award for leadership and innovation in aging and inclusion. At the ceremony, Helen spoke with heartfelt gratitude, emphasizing that the work was collective and ongoing. She dedicated the honor to everyone who believed in second chances and the power of connection. Helen's health continued to require attention, but she faced each day with the same determination that had carried her through years of transformation. She made sure to document her journey, not just for herself but as a gift to others who might walk similar paths. Her writings became a resource and inspiration, a roadmap for courage and change. As the seasons turned, Helen found joy in mentoring younger leaders, witnessing their passion and fresh ideas. She felt a deep satisfaction in knowing that the seed she had planted would grow beyond her own lifetime. Legacy, she understood, was a bridge from past to future, a living dialogue across time. One crisp autumn afternoon, Helen walked through the garden she had tended for years. The colors were vibrant, the air crisp and fragrant. She felt a profound connection to the cycle of life, growth, decay, renewal. She whispered a promise to herself and those she loved, to keep living with purpose, to keep inspiring change, and to leave a legacy of hope and resilience. Helen's story was no longer just her own, it was part of a larger tapestry of transformation, courage, and connection. She knew that the one rule Elon Musk lived by, the relentless pursuit of what matters, no matter the odds, was the same rule she had adopted. It was this rule that made her life rich, her impact lasting, and her legacy truly alive. The journey had taken her from fear to freedom, from isolation to community, from doubt to unwavering belief. And Helen was ready for whatever came next, confident that the legacy she left would continue to spark new beginnings for generations to come. Helen sat on the porch of her small, sunlit home, the gentle breeze carrying the scents of blooming flowers and freshly turned earth from her garden. She looked out over the town she had come to love anew, a town that had witnessed her transformation from a woman shadowed by doubt to one radiating purpose. The makerspace, now humming with activity, was more than just a building, it was a symbol of possibility, community, and relentless courage. Helen thought back to the moment it all began, the night she first dared to dream again, sparked by a simple idea and the inspiration of a man who defied convention, Elon Musk. His words had been a catalyst, a whisper challenging her to question everything she thought about aging and change. Some people don't like change, but you need to embrace change if the alternative is disaster. That idea had ignited something inside her, a flame that refused to be extinguished by years of fear or societal expectation. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the porch, Helen reflected on the journey she had traveled. She had faced moments of isolation, rejection, and self-doubt. She had wrestled with questions that haunted many: is it too late for me? Does my life still matter? But through it all, she found the answer: it was never too late. Change was possible, and so was a new beginning. The community around her had transformed as well. The makerspace was a vibrant hub where people of all ages came together, bridging generations through creativity and collaboration. Seniors found new purpose, teens discovered mentors, and families rekindled bonds. Helen saw the threads of connection weaving a tapestry of resilience and hope. Her relationship with Diane had blossomed into one of deep love and mutual respect. The sisters who once drifted apart now stood side by side, united in their shared mission to uplift others. Helen's son Mark, too, had become an active partner in her endeavors, their bond strengthened by honesty and forgiveness. The personal bridges she had rebuilt were among the most precious treasures of her new life. As twilight settled, Helen took out her journal, the pages filled with reflections, dreams, lessons, and gratitude. She wrote about the power of persistence, the courage to dream again, and the importance of embracing vulnerability. She penned words she hoped would inspire others: I was never too old. I was just waiting for permission to matter again. Her story was not unique, she knew. It was a story shared by countless others who felt invisible or left behind but longed to step into the light of possibility. Helen's legacy was not in what she had built alone but in the lives she touched, the hearts she healed, and the courage she ignited. The porch light flickered on as stars began to peek through the velvet sky. Helen felt a profound peace, a sense of completion coupled with anticipation. Her transformation was not an end but a continuous unfolding, a new beginning every day. She understood now that life's most powerful rule was to keep moving forward, fueled by hope, purpose, and love. Just as Elon Musk dared to challenge the impossible, Helen had dared to rewrite her story. And in doing so, she had shown that it is never too late to change, to dream, and to live fully. Helen whispered a promise to herself and to anyone who might hear: this is just the beginning. The journey ahead was vast and unknown, but she was ready to embrace whatever came with open arms and an unyielding heart. The night embraced her with its quiet grace as Helen closed her journal and looked up at the stars. Somewhere out there, countless others were waking up to their own new beginnings, inspired by stories like hers. And that, she thought, was the greatest gift of all, the endless possibility of change, no matter the age, no matter the past, always moving forward into the light of a new dawn. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?